Hey Barstow Jr., I feel like this lighting looks weird. Alright, I'm going to talk about accidentals for you guys. We did go over this in class, but in case you forgot, and or you weren't listening, and or you just need a refresher, or you just clicked on this video because I posted it, here's going to be your refresher. So when we get into the basics, right, and this may look familiar, hopefully it's all coming back to you, but in case it's not, we see this little B, that's a flat. We see this thing that looks like a hashtag. It is not a hashtag. It is a sharp. It's been a sharp for hundreds of years, and it just wants to be called as such. And we see this lovely sort of horizontal-ish, box-ish icon, right, meaning a natural, okay? And hopefully you've seen these symbols before. If you haven't, well then welcome. You'll be seeing them because we're going to work on our chromatic scale as a band, and this would come up. Okay, so the first one is a flat sign, right? And this is going to lower a pitch a half a step. You're like, okay. So when we see this next to a note, usually if you play like flute, trombone, baritone, tuba, the first note we see it next to is usually a B, right? And so instead of playing a B natural, we're going to play a B flat, right? B natural to B flat. It would sound something like this, right? Kind of reminds me of the opening of Jurassic Park, if that's what you're thinking of, right? Do, ti, do. So it kind of reminds me of that as a sound, as opposed to going down a whole step like, right? That's a whole different kind of sound. So whatever note you see that B on, it's going to then bring that note down. So if it was next to E, which is usually the second note that we see this next to often, instead of being played as E natural, we're going to go ahead and make that E flat, right? E natural, E flat, depending on the instrument you play. All right, to counter that, right, then we will see this sharp sign. I am not a hashtag. It's going to stay saying that because it gets used as a hashtag today. But what that means is the opposite of what a flat was. If a flat was like, let's go ahead and lower this, the sharp sign is, let's raise it. Commonly thought of as jaws, usually. Right? Oftenly thought as Jaws. So where the first one reminds us of Jurassic Park, this next one reminds us of Jaws. Good for you, John Williams. So if we see that and we see it next to a note, we just know, okay, I'm not going to think about this note as what it's naturally called, but instead raise it up. I know if I was like a saxophone player, for example, we often see F sharp, right? We see this middle fingered F sharp instead of a first finger F sharp, which would be our first finger, which would be F natural, right? Okay, so just thinking about that in the context of instruments you guys use on the regular. If we've used a flat or a sharp, and we want to go ahead and fix it and undo it, we use this lovely guy, natural, right? And what we're doing with natural is basically saying, I cancel out all previous things I have done to that note. So let's say I made it flat for just a second, and it was an E flat, but now I want it to go back to a regular E. I'm going to go ahead and put this natural sign on it saying E natural. E regular, no flats, no sharps, no nothing. Same thing if we were to put it on F, right? Go back to F natural instead of F sharp, or something like that. So all it is it's there to cancel stuff out. Now, that means if a note is naturally flat and we see this half step on it, this is going to raise it upward from being that flat version, and vice versa. It's going to naturally bring things down, but it's kind of a switch hitter. It doesn't mean specifically up or down, just back to whatever it is called generically, okay? If you're thinking about it in the context of a piano, using a flat or a sharp is using those black keys up top lots of times, not every time, but lots of times, and using this natural key is bringing it to the white keys kind of on our keyboard, if that's another way that you're thinking about it. Okay, so here's some rules with accidentals. So they're going to put this in front of a note, okay? And here's where it gets weird. They're in front of a note, but we say their name after the note. And you're like, what? So when we show it, you'll see an F sharp, and it'll put that little sharp, right, the little hashtag logo, in front of the note, because you have to know that before you play the note. They can't tell us that after. But we don't call it sharp F. We call it F sharp. So just think about that, okay? But it always comes before a note if the note's going to change. If the note's not going to change, then they wouldn't put that on there at all for you. Secondly, they remain in effect until the end of that measure. So let's say the first note of your measure is an E, and they want it to be an E flat. Okay, cool. And then let's say the last beat of your measure is an E as well. Well, because we called the first one E flat, we have to call this one E flat. Basically, it's inside a little fence of a bar line, and when it's set inside those two little bars, for that minute, it can't change. Now, let's say that last note is an E flat, and the next note in the next measure is an E as well. Now it could be E natural, right? Because it's past the little gate line, which you'll see actually on the next example. And yes, an accidental is different than a regular note. Don't just ignore it. It has some weird thing in front of it, so you're like, I can't do this. look up the difference for the fingering if you have to, right? If you don't know it off the top of your head, then look for it. But don't just breeze through thinking like, oh, every one of these notes is the same note. Whew, good thing. Now I wonder why they put that extra icon on there. And I say that it shouldn't be something that has to be said, but I'm saying it because I've seen it and heard it done. Okay? So, check in that you got it. Let's say these first two notes start. Those are our naturals, right? Inside this little fence post. Now we see there's sharps. So, this fourth note, am I sharp or natural? Well, let's see. If our rule was inside a measure copies the same thing, then that means we went natural, natural, it's sharp, and then once it goes to sharp, this one's going to stay sharp as well, right? Because they're inside the same fence post, right? Boom, inside this bar line and this bar line. Now that next measure we have an F. Am I sharp or natural? You should be thinking natural, okay? Because that sharp only applies to these two. It does not apply to this one that's now on its own because it's like in a separate yard. It's the neighbor. It's doing its own thing. All right, and that's our review on accidentals, right? Making sure we understand flats, sharps, naturals. They all change our notes, right? And when they happen to change our notes, we use the word accidental as the word saying we accidentally changed it to something else to make our music more interesting. And when we see one of those, it lasts for the whole measure, but as soon as bar lines end, we go ahead and reset and go to something else. Now use this, think of this as you're going forward into your chromatic scale, because you need to understand the difference of all of these notes changing as they come up inside that chromatic scale.